Anthony, why were you chosen to speak today for the Martin Luther King Jr. Commemorative Address?
You'll have to ask the people who invited me, but I assume it's because I have interests in the things that Dr. King believed in questions about social justice, and also I have an interest in Dr. King. I'm going to talk about him in particular as someone who I think Americans ought to know about.
And you've done a lot of work with the civil rights movement, and you've studied a lot with civil rights. Can you tell me a little bit about your work?
So my main work is as an academic and a theorist, as a political philosopher and an ethicist, and that's I've worked on a lot of things, but my first work was on in the long time ago, long before you were born, in the 1980s, was on questions of race and racism. But I got interested in, more generally, in questions about various kinds of identities and how they relate to ethics and politics. So obviously race relates to politics because we have a history of racial division in our country in which the state played a role, the government played a role. But like all countries, we also have history of gender discrimination and discrimination against LGBTQ people and so on. And these are all, and also we have a history of imperfect equality for people of different income levels, different classes. So all of those are things that seem interesting to think about and try to think both about exactly how to understand what's gone wrong and then think about what we might do about it. As far as doing things about it go, I mean, I've mostly been doing kind of educational things. So one of the things that I did with my friend and colleague, Henry Louis Gates, was to develop something called the Encyclopedia Africana, which was an encyclopedia of the African American experience, on the theory that this was going to be useful both for the education of African American children, but also for the education of children generally, to have access to information about the truth about the experience of black people, not just in the United States, but all around the world.
How do you feel today about getting to honor a very important civil rights leader here at Elon?
Well, it's obviously an honor to be asked to honor someone so important in the history of our country and in a way of the world. Dr. King is known all around the world for speaking out for justice, not just for black people, but towards the end of his life, he was engaged in trying to improve the circumstances of poor people in this country. He had a Poor People's Campaign. Also, he was an anti-war activist during the period of the Vietnam War. So he spoke up as you might expect a Christian pastor to do. He spoke up for justice and for equality and for love, which is that central Christian moral idea in the politics of his day.
Like you just said, he's taught so many people so many things like love, equality. What lessons do you take away from his life and his legacy?
Well, I think there are many to take. Obviously, one is to take seriously the thought that we have an unfinished struggle for equality in the world, in our country and in the world. I think another is that people can be enormously important and positively important for questions of political justice and be flawed. Dr. King was a flawed individual in some ways, as we all are. We're all flawed, nobody's perfect. I think it's good to be able to recognize and celebrate someone for the things that are great about them while acknowledging the things that are not so great.
How do you kind of think civil rights are today versus how they were back then? Well,
when he started out, when he got married, for example, to Coretta Scott in Marion, he couldn't stay in a hotel in that town, so he spent the first night of his married life as in the guest room of a funeral parlor in Marion. And now, because of the legislation that was passed, in part because of campaigns that he played a part in, it's illegal to deny people accommodations on the basis of race in this country. And that's one of his achievements. So clearly things are not as they were in the 1950s when he was beginning his work. But his work is obviously uncompleted. We human beings are imperfect creatures. We never get everything exactly right. And I think it remains the case in this country that you can show that race plays a role in determining people's life chances, and that black people have, on average, worse life chances. And that's still true. And so there's unfinished work to be done. He would have said, and I agree, that there's unfinished work to be done on the question of the lives of poor people in our country, whatever their color, black or white. We have, for a rich country, we have a remarkable number of people whose lives are damaged by poverty because they don't have proper access to health care, for example, or because they don't have decent jobs, or because they have a hard time finding somewhere that they can afford to live. In many of our cities, housing is extremely expensive. So there are lots of issues, affordability issues, access to healthcare issues, equal treatment by the government, by the police, for example. Again, poor people and black people both, he would have told us, are not treated equally in policing. I'm not saying that every cop is a bad person. I'm saying that there's systematic injustices continue on the basis of race and class in our country. And so he would want us to remember that and to keep on with the struggles.
Now, you just talked about a lot of lessons with inequality and justice that a lot of people may not know about. Here at Elon, we actually have a fellows cohort. So it's the Isabella Cannon Leadership Fellows, and they travel to Alabama for 2 weeks, and they visit Birmingham, Montgomery, and Selma, and they actually travel the Civil Rights Tour. Why do you think that is so important for students to do that today?
I think that if we're trying to understand the historical events and to think about what their significance is for us now, in the present, there's nothing more important than having the going to the places where it happened, seeing the traces of what happened there, going to museums and sites where the great events of the Civil Rights Movement happened. There's a kind of concreteness of experience that you get when you actually see, so that when you go back, when you read about an event, you have a sense of the place in which it happened. And of course, the people who guide, the tour guides in these sites, are people who have a great deal of knowledge about those events. And so I think it is, there's something about having the concrete experience of a place where something important happened that is, that kind of enriches our historical imagination. The Gettysburg Address is an important American document, but going to Gettysburg, looking and seeing the battlefield, is a kind of concrete experience that gives one a sense of connection with that past. And then one can think about what it means for the present.
What ideas and wisdom do you plan to share with our audience here today?
Well, the main thing I want to do is just to remind people of the main events of Dr. King's life, and as I say, to insist that we should face him as he was, which was he was an imperfect, as we all are. He was unfaithful to his wife. He didn't always acknowledge his sources in his writing. There are various complaints that can be made about him. He wasn't a great administrator. And to try and identify, therefore, what is great and important about him, which I think is, in the end, that he gave voice to these important American concerns, and that it's his voice we remember from the March on Washington, and it's his talk of an American dream that we recall. And that was performance, that was theater, that was words, but it had a huge practical impact because those words galvanized people to participate in those events in Birmingham and Selma and Montgomery, and they the movement in which he played so central a part was one that gave us the freedom of access, the equality of access to public accommodations, the fact that black people can now in this country can't be kept off buses or out of stores or hotels or motels, and of course the Voting Rights Act, which gave real voting significance to black people at a time when through various mechanisms it had been possible essentially to deny black people in many parts of the South access to the vote. So again, these struggles are not complete. The Voting Rights Act is, well, the various Voting Rights Acts, it's been reenacted over time, still deal with problems that remain in terms of equal access, and the debates right now about how to district in a way that's racially fair and so on. These are serious discussions about how to make our democracy one that is genuinely a democracy of equals.
And my last question today, is there anything that you would like to share with me that we haven't talked about?
Gosh. No, I mean, I think the main thing I want to say is that we should think about this great American, but we should recognize, like all great Americans, he has his flaws as well as his virtues, and that the reason he's a great American is because the virtues are so important, and they continue to be relevant. We are, in the 1950s, we were a very racially divided society. Now we're a society divided in many ways along political lines, for example. And Dr. King spoke for the idea that we are one people, one community of equals, and that is the real core of the American creed, the idea that all of us were created equal and that we are entitled to equality in government, and in society.
Well, Anthony, thank you so much for sitting down with us today, and thank you for sharing your wisdom with Elon University and its community.
Thank you for inviting me.
Of course.